Hello everyone, welcome to 6 Days of Snow walkthrough. In the last episode, we finished the main story, and today we are covering the epilogue. So, I'm pretty excited on how this whole aftermath is going to be. I'm curious on what the epilogue's all about. I have a feeling in what it's going to be about. But anyways, I'm pretty sure all of the inappropriate stuff is over with. But just to be on the safe side, 6 Days of Snow is a free game, a visual novel on Steam that is tagged with sexual content and nudity. So if you guys are uncomfortable with any of that, I suggest you watch one of my other videos that isn't related to 6 Days of Snow. For the majority of the story that we had, it was a elderly man, older man, say about maybe 40s, 50s, having relations with an 18-year-old. So give or take a few years. So that was how the story was and everything. Which the story wasn't. It was a nice story, even though I hated the main character and everything. And he did have redeeming qualities at the end. By the way, day 6 was long. It took a lot of reading. But anyways, today is the epilogue. So let's watch it or read it and see what happens. So who's excited? Alright, let's go. 6 years later. She collected her daughter from the daycare center at 3 o'clock after she finished having late lunch with Maki. Over a gently steaming plate of still warm chicken, gyoza, and hearty, nourishing rice, she and Maki had discussed Mr. Terada's comments about their Tanka's poems. That is hard to say. Though she was still a relative novice, Mr. Terada had been very complimentary about her poem. Apparently, her use of repetition had captured the peaks of the snowy, desolate mountains perfectly. She had blushed with pride as Mr. Terada had complimented her, her head bent. Shyly, she had tried to claim that her poem was not that good. Not really. It didn't seem fair to some of the other women who had been studying under Mr. Terada for years. If she captured the silence and sadness of the mountains, it was because of her own livid experiences. The words had welled up not from vague ideas or reminiscences of blurred photographs, but from her own past. How could she be complimented so highly, by Mr. Terada no less, for indulging so in her own memories? But Maki had laughed when she protested and told her to be less humble. You should learn how to accept a compliment. They won't kill you, Maki had chortled, while biting into the crisp outer shell of her gyoza. What's a gyoza? I suppose I still need to work on that, she had replied, her head bowed in suitable humility. Maki laughed. You've been attending classes here for almost half a year now. You don't need to be so polite. That's just how I was raised. You country girls are all so funny. Funny? How? You get so flustered whenever somebody says something nice to you. You're not allergic to compliments, are you? I'm just unused to it. People didn't used to be so nice to me. Well, get used to it. I think you have a real talent, and you're fun too. Hey, Maki waved over a passing waiter without any restraint. Can we have some more green tea? She'd been mortified by Maki's openness and had slunk down in her chair, her face bright red. City-born women were so different to those from the countryside, she had reflected, while the waiter topped up Maki's cup. Maki had no problems accepting compliments from Mr. Terada. While some of the other students at Mr. Terada's poetry lessons would try to deflect his praise, Maki never bothered. She simply smiled. Some of the women, the ones who hadn't been born in Tokyo, thought Maki was too shameless. They whispered about her behind her back. Initially, she had agreed, but after 3 weeks, she changed her mind. Maki was incredible. She was everything she had always wanted to be and everything she could never be. She wondered as she poked at her own gyoza with her chopsticks, whether she could have been so spirited if only she'd been raised in a different environment. Maybe it was the tall buildings of Tokyo that did it. They were so aggrandizing. One born here amidst the hustle and bustle of cars and shops and sprawling residential areas had to be sure of their own sense of self, or else they would get swept away. Maki wore Western fashions. She turned her nose up at traditional Japanese clothes and instead wore the most amazing outfits. Flared trousers, button-down shirts, or printed dresses with hems that stopped at the knee. It was Maki who, after her first session with Mr. Terada, had taken her shopping. She owed her current outfit, maroon sweater and pleated skirt, to the older woman's tutelage. It had been a bit disconcerting at first to wear something so very short, but it was liberating too. So this was how Western women dressed. She had never imagined. The process of reinvention was hard, and sometimes it was scary, but it was never without merit. Finally free from the clothes and manners and gestures that had been imposed upon her for years by her mother, she could be the woman she had always wanted to be. Bold, fierce, determinedly independent. The dinner with Maki concluded, she hoisted her bag about her shoulder and set off to the nursery. It was only a few streets away from the restaurant, so she walked. It was in the middle of November, and it was starting to get cold. Though no snow had fallen, the air was chilly. It tugged at her hair, making it flutter behind her like a wave. It was nostalgic. It reminded her of home. Maybe that was why she'd written the poem about the mountains. Ever since her move to Tokyo, she paid little attention to her memories. But now the weather had changed. They were coming back to her, like snowflakes dancing in the air. And to think, only 6 months ago, she had been living in the desolate mountains of Hakuba. How things changed. Her daughter, Yokiko, was delighted to see her mother. Though they'd only been aparted for a few hours, to her, it must have seemed like years. Yukiko threw her arms around her mother's neck and clung to her close, like a monkey. She laughed in turn and scooped Yukiko up in her arms. Yukiko was young, only 3 years old, and she could be cradled as easily as a bag of flour. She had to stop by the supermarket on the way home to buy some pork for dinner. Pork was her husband's favorite, and he'd been so very busy with work ever since their move to the big city. But first, she had somewhere she wanted to go. Okazaki's. Okazaki's was a small, relatively dusty bookshop that had been built many years ago. The shelves were wooden and reached all the way up the ceiling, and they were crammed with old tomes. The inside of the shop was lit by gas lamps, but they were always dimmed perhaps to preserve the books. Some of the books in this old place, decrepit though it was, were rather valuable. At least, that was what the owner said. She wasn't too sure if she believed her. The owner was a peculiar woman. She had gleaned through repeated visits that the owner had inherited the shop from her grandfather, and she had done little to fix it up. It smelt peculiar inside the shop, of dust and ink and bancha tea. Bancha tea was known for its strong, straw-like smell, which made the young woman think of farms. It was the owner's favorite drink, and she always had a mug of pale green bancha tea with her. Yukiko didn't like the smell of the tea, and she would always complain when her mother took her to this small, out-of-the-way library. Apparently, it hurt her eyes. Her mother had ceased bringing Yukiko with her for a while, to lessen her complaints. But today was a special occasion. After months of searching on her behest, the owner had finally managed to get her hands on a book she had been seeking for the last 5 years. The book itself was nothing special. It was a slim volume of poetry by an author who had, 20 years or so ago, been quite popular for his breakout piece, Fireworks. Now, Tanabe Eiji was an old name, just as dusty as the books that lined the shelves of Okazakis. It was still possible to find his anthology of earlier pieces, including the famed Fireworks, and she'd uncovered a second-hand dog-eared volume of his first and only novel in the second-hand bookshop, but this collection of poetry was different. Unfortunately, the poetry anthology hadn't been as moving as she had remembered it in her childhood, and the novel was almost excruciatingly maudlin. Though the novel featured a young girl, apprenticed to be a geisha, the girl's mentality had belonged more to an older man than a teenager. At least, she didn't remember being moved to examine her own breast in such detail when she was 15. A little disappointed by her finds, she had vowed to move on from Tanabe Eiji and his works. He was a misty figure who inhabited her past. Sleeping ghosts were best left alone. Still, despite her resolution, her curiosity continued to haunt her. There was one collection of poems of his she had not read. Few people had. It had been released in a very limited print run. Only 1,000 or so copies had been created. Trying to find one had been nigh impossible, and after scouring all the used bookshops and libraries she had almost given up on her search. That was until she had heard about Okazakis. Apparently, if given time, the owner could find any book one could ever want, even lurid tales of so-called romance that were deemed to be indecent. She wasn't interested in such stories, however. She was more interested in the poems. 6 Days of Snow. Now the owner had finally managed to find it, and she could read it at long last. The work, which had been written and addressed to her. "Take good care of it," said the owner, Shoko, as she handed her the book. "Finding this took me no small amount of trouble." "I'm aware," she replied with a small bow of her head. "Thank you so very much." "I don't do this for free, you know. I might be kind, but my heart isn't that deep." "I know. I appreciate it. Here." She drew a few bills from her pocket and slid them over the wooden counter, which was marked with rings from the bottom of the Shoko's ever-present cup of bancha tea. Shoko, as she had discovered, wasn't the sort of woman who bothered with silly things like coasters. The bookshop was dingy and run down. There was little point. "This is the rest of the payment, as we agreed." "Thank you," said Shoko, with a small bow of her head and a cat-like smile. It's a pleasure doing business with you. She took the book in her hands, holding it reverently, and walked to the back of the shop. There were a few chairs set for prospective buyers to flip through their future purchases, but few people used them. Maybe it was because of the smell. It was so dingy in the back of the shop, it was hard to see, but at least the smell of the bancha tea was less pervasive here. She took a seat on a chair, the book in hand, and pulled Yukiko onto her lap. Yukiko squirmed for a few moments, evidently displeased by this arrangement, though she had clung to her mother desperately just a few moments hence. "Mommy," said Yukiko, pouting, "I'm bored. Can we go home now?" "Just a second. I want to look at this first." "Can't you look at it at home?" "I could," she said with a small pause, as realization finally hit her. She could take this book home, if she so desired. She had paid for it, and it belonged to her now. It was yet another volume she could add to her slim collection of Tanabe Eiji. But reading Eiji's works at home, where she cooked meals for her family and played with Yukiko and slept with her husband, didn't seem entirely right. This was an experience that was best had in a place like Okazaki's, in the dark and in the gloom. It was a place where she could indulge in her memories, free from prying eyes, and then seal them away once more like the sparkling city of Atlantis. "This book is important to me," she said by the way of explanation. "Would you mind waiting?" Yukiko lifted her head, her interest piqued. "Does it have pictures?" "I don't think so." "Then I don't care." "Wouldn't you like to at least see it?" "Well, just a peek." "Okay." "Then let's take a look." Her heart pounding inside her mouth, she slowly cracked open the pages of the book. Eiji's last volume of poems, a love letter to her. There inside the front cover, she could see the inscription, meaningless to those who hadn't been there at the Azami Inn all those years ago and didn't know what had happened, but priceless to her. "To Ryuko, I hope you find your own happiness someday." Ryuko sniffed. She felt something catch in her throat, and she didn't think it was the dust. She looked down at Yukiko, cradled in her arms. Her weight was warm and comforting against Ryuko's lap. She thought about her new life in Tokyo, the poetry lessons and the art classes, and her feeble attempts to learn French. The meals out with Maki and the large shrines far, far fancier than anything Hakuba had to offer, and her childlike amazement upon her very first trip to the cinema. She thought about her new friends and her husband and their plans to travel the world. China, France, Italy. She thought about all the places she had seen already and all the places she wanted to see. She thought about the people by her side and the people she had left behind. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment, sitting in the back of Okazaki's, surrounded by bookshelves, her fingers poised over Tanabe Eiji's 6 Days of Snow. She thought long and hard, and then... "Hey, Mommy," Yukiko piped up suddenly. "Aren't you going to turn the page?" "Oh," said Ryuko, starting in surprise. "I'm sorry. Were you thinking about something?" "I was thinking about a lot of things. Happy things, some of them." Yukiko screwed up her face. "I don't like sad things." "Neither do I." And that was why Ryuko had vowed she would leave the sad, lonely little girl from her past behind her. She was a new woman now, her own person. Maybe in the end she didn't need to read a second-hand account about herself from a man she had barely known and hadn't loved, but thought she might have cared for about her own loneliness. She had moved on from them. The words on the page would never change, but she had. She had changed more than she had thought was possible. Why was she trying to find her old lost self amongst those static pages? Time could be rewound as many times as you wanted within a series of poems. You just needed to keep flipping back to the beginning. But real life didn't work that way. Her life didn't work that way. And she was thankful for it. She didn't need to dig up her old memories now, like the snow that had fallen around the hot springs. And so, with this thought in mind, Mommy? Ryoko closed the book. She set it to one side. She had paid a hefty sum of money for it, but now she no longer wanted it. She no longer needed it. Are you going to leave the book behind? Said Yukiko. That's right, Ryoko replied. But why? Because, said Ryoko, pressing a kiss against Yukiko's cheek. I already have what I want right here. Aww. If Eiji had written these poems hoping Ryoko could become happy one day, he needn't have worried. Ryoko's life might not have been a fairy tale, but that didn't mean she would be unhappy forever. All snow melted if you gave it enough time. And it's done. That was a nice ending. Nice epilogue. I liked it. A little longer than I expected. Didn't go as I thought. I thought it was gonna be like she had like a Mr. Tanabe's baby, but she didn't, which is good. But anyways, I liked it. It was very nice. So that was 6 Days of Snow. We're done with it. So I don't know what I'm gonna do next. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed 6 Days of Snow as much as I did. It's really interesting that the epilogue played a part with the title by having a book named 6 Days of Snow. And in the intro, when you first start up the game, it does have the lines, to Ryoko, may you find your happiness someday, or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And I love how it all just ties together at the end. Anyways, that was a nice story. I really liked it. Tell me what you guys think in the comments section below. And if you have any suggestions about what I should read next or play next, please also leave that in the comments section below. Also, if I mispronounced anything, I tried really hard today, but there were a few words that I struggled with. So if I made any mispronunciations, please feel free to correct me in the comment section below. I really would love to learn from you guys. But until next time, I hope you guys have a good day. I hope you're safe. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.